This is take three. Yeah, third time. I usually fire at the hip and go with whatever it is, and sometimes I gotta find myself going back and getting stuck on something. I don't know, just says, no, we're gonna do this second time. Okay, getting the band together. Otherwise, finding an excuse to or justification for this diverse group of player characters who are now going to become enmeshed in an adventure. The traditional let's avoid the bar and tavern because it's old and wore out. Well, look at it from a perspective of we all done that and it's been done before, and it's as one of the it's probably the easiest way to justify how a group of people that didn't know each other prior to the pending adventure find themselves in a common ground area. If you look at even today's standards, but if you look at the standards of the Middle Ages or the old fantasy settings, how many places are there that would you would have such a diverse group of individuals just loitering around? You know, the local tavern, water and hole, whatever you, food, vendor of some sort, or perhaps a marketplace. That's an underutilized starting point, I think. I have used it once or twice, at least, maybe a few more times than that, where an adventure begins at the beginning in a market setting, where these individuals are out there for their own purposes and get drawn into this situation. Uh, this goes to say that there's a lot of good opportunities still to use the bar setting per se, but if you do it enough times, you find yourself doing it from as many different angles as possible. I've had it everything opening from an opening brawl to somebody stole something and everybody gets accused, or one person gets accusing others, or so on and so forth. You pretty much cover all your bases at some point. It's a lazy way of introducing groups of individuals too. Now, uh, there was there was a parallel topic to this some months back on the Brigade channel, and it was talking about using how do finding alternate ways of getting a group of player characters together for the purpose of a game or an adventure without using that old trope. So a cleric, a cleric, a barbarian, a rogue, and a wizard are all bellied up to the bar. Okay. Uh, in the discussion at the time, and I'm going piecemeal with this in my head. This is why I had to go back and redo this video because I was struggling on trying to remember exactly the text or the context of what we were talking about at the time. Was using some other justification for allowing the group to get together other than your traditional murder hobo mindset, and or you just throw a bunch of nobodies, a bunch of strangers together and they're just supposed to mesh. Okay, plausible options are they're all from the same village and the adventure begins in the village, and for one reason or another they're determined to pursue whatever the adventure is. So if we look at it from a module perspective, something happens and maybe the son, somebody's relative gets killed or captured or whatever, and he sets out determined to save his relative or find out who did it and punish him. And one of his friends goes along, and for other reasons, other members of the community go. Now, the downside of that, of course, is the diverse factor. We don't always have a small community where you have elves and dwarves and humans and halflings and so on, all living together in harmony. So it makes it a little much more of a stress. Now, if everybody's playing humans, it's an easier take on that. The second option was to have them already pre-employed. So why is it that they always have to be these mercenary murder hobo types who just go up and decide to go off on an adventure? They could be all members of the local militia or guard, and they're tasked by the town master or whatever to go out and track down the problem or find an answer and discuss or deal with it. Another option is if everybody shares the same clerical background, perhaps it's a group from the local temple or church, or the local lord tasks these people. Your one or two, and then one or two people get tasked to go do something, and the others are just associates of those two or one of those two and go along as retainers or assistants or helpers or what have you. It's a perspective of how you want to lay out the dynamics. I think you all know that. We all have done it. So how do we get the band together? How do we get the band together in different ways that avoids the traditional settings, right? There's always that. That's part of the challenge of being the creative side of things, is trying to avoid that same rut. I know, like, I had one group player, like, oh my God, we're all doing the same thing over and over again. It's like looking in a mirror. And maybe take a step back for a minute and reflect on, maybe there was some truth to that. Maybe I was just so focused on my specific set. This is how I'm going to do things every time I do things. So I want to step back and look from that different perspective. There's an ongoing conversation about Star Trek between myself and Ronnie and a couple others who have mixed opinions on how narrow the gameplay is in that game system. You know, traditionally speaking, I went looking for an image for the old Star Trek game system, and I was surprised at how many other versions of games, the Star Trek RPGs that come out since the faster version. I'm so far behind the times, it's not funny. It's rain and ice falling on the RV roof, so if it's drowning me out, I apologize. It's kind of a hairy day out there at the moment. I was hoping it's supposed to clear up this afternoon because I got to go meet some people about some things this afternoon. I was supposed to work this morning, but the truck's still in the shop waiting on something, and the road conditions are making it so it's really not a good idea to run around out here this early anyway, unless you have to. So give me opportunities to catch up on some of my video and log it. The Star Trek problem was everybody's a member of one of the flagship whatevers, and we're all officers, so on and so forth. And we have to follow, either you follow the prime director or you don't, and a lot of players don't get the nuance. And that's true. There's a lot of players, you want a lot of more things out of Star Trek, you might as well play Star Wars. It's the style differences. And there's good arguments to this. One of the reasons that Star Trek, the old Star Trek, petered out, I think, because Star Wars was taking over and giving them the much wider Wild West type adventure, high adventure, that you can't really get with Star Trek. Although my argument is that's not true. It's just like using the bar settings over and over again. You can get very creative with the bar setting and still have a tavern setting. In the Star Trek universe, I argued that you do not have to follow the company line. You do not have to be Captain Kirk and Spock and so on and so forth. Matter of fact, you're better off if you're not. I have the belief that it would be better for the player characters to be lower level members of a crew, and that way the senior officers are NPCs, and these guys are going to be tasked to go do something, go do this, go fix that, go on an away mission, what have you. Or, and if this is where you have the wider range of source books for your game system, as in the Star Trek, I have enough of the source book material that you want to play a group of Klingons or you want to play a group of traders, you can do it, and the mechanics are there. You know, you don't have to be in that narrow box, so to speak. So we don't have to use the tavern. Although I have actually ran at least one campaign in my life that's popping in my head, where the actual short campaign was based around the bar, the tavern itself, trying to figure out. It was like a whodunit, although I'm not very good at that sort of stuff, so it didn't turn out as hotly as well as I'd hoped. But why else get the group together? Well, I guess it's a matter of play. I know some people like to allow the players to put their own backstory in and then justify why they're there at that setting. But I can also make the same argument. It doesn't have to be the bar. It could be the local marketplace. In medieval times, the second most likeliest place to find a diverse group of individuals intermingling would be at the local marketplace. You know, the wizard's there looking for components, the cleric's looking for whatever, maybe spreading the good word. The dwarf is trying to get a notch ground out of his axe, or or so on and so forth. And something happens, and boom, they all find themselves working together to solve an issue, or are all drawn after the same problem. I've done that too, where the initial party were actually in competition with each other to some small degree, and end up getting stymied by the bad guys, and deciding to work better to work together as a team than to work against each other and trying to achieve basically the same goals. So, how do you get the band together? How do you? Well, how can you? Huge amounts of variety, right? Another one's the potential overworld setting. I'm going to pull a rabbit out of my butt with Twilight 2000. Something most of you probably are not familiar with. The premise there is you're what's left of a U.S. military or a British military unit that's uh, stuck behind enemy lines in Poland after in the weeks after the initial World War III breakout. So at the time, it was set in the 80s. Uh, the books were created in the 80s, so your NATO forces would have pushed into the Western Soviet bloc nations, and the nukes finally fell and blew up most of the world, or a good chunk of the world, and now what's left of your unit is stuck behind enemy lines, and the war is more or less over, everybody's lost. Now everything's devolving, society's falling apart around you. What do you do, and how do you get out? Your ultimate goal is already preset. The goal is for your group to go home. So you're going to find your way across war-ravaged, nuked Europe and find a way back across the ocean to the States, or back across the channel to England, depending on what your take on it is. And along the way, you can pick up members of the Soviet bloc nation states. Everybody's in it for themselves at this point. So there's your setting, and it doesn't have to be a tavern or a bar. It can be a grander setting. Let's see. The last two game campaigns I ran. The first one was I had a group of 4 people, and it ran for almost 6 months. Almost 6 months. The premise there was these men from the more civilized nation to the south had invaded the grasslands of these horse lords, because I wanted a campaign where everybody was on horseback, because it's one of those set of game mechanics that's in the book in small dose for Dungeons and Dragons, but there's such a wide range of potential. So it's your Mongolian horde type thing, where you're American Indian, Native American Indian, Wild West kind of thing, where everybody's on horseback, and you utilize those skill sets, but they're so underused. Most of the time, horses are just as a means as an end, and justification of why it didn't take us 6 weeks to go from here to here. It took 6 days. So, in this aspect, this group raided out for unknown reasons, and the chieftain of the tribe was wiped out. He was killed, and his head bodyguards were killed. This left the young lord, which was one of the players who he always likes to be the dwarven tank. He never likes to be the one in the charge of things. And we just kind of shoehorned him into it. He was the reluctant leader, which he played real well because he was a reluctant player. And his retainers. One of them was the tribe shaman, and another one was the loyal armsman retainer that had taught him his basics, the old grizzled veteran kind of thing. And this went on for quite a while. It sadly ended when 2 of the 4 people were snatched up by rocks and could not figure out how to get out of the rock's grasp, and basically flew off into the sunset to the rock's nest. And it was assumed, since the group decided that we'd played long enough at that point, there was no reason to follow through on it. And so we had this setting out in the steppes in a village, and everybody were all from the same community. So there were pretty much everybody was human, and that was that. The other one that I had 2 players, and it ran for about 2 months, 2.5 months, and I called it two dwarves in a wagon. And basically, first level dwarven fighters, and I said, okay, you're just trying to make a living. So you hired them. They hired themselves out as teamsters. So they got hired to drive a supply wagon between the main citadel and these various locations around the region. So I had a small map, and my mindset was that they would run this circuit several times, and each time would have certain encounters that would build on each other or would build up over time. So the scenario was, you're both looking for the same job. You end up getting hired together, and that's how they learn to deal with each other's personal issues and personal agendas. And like I said, which was interesting because it allowed me to. The setting was a controlled, small environment with repetitive passes, which allowed for me to develop and utilize some monstrous encounters that would normally be underutilized because of what they are. And if you're familiar with a bogle, bogles are something that can be a reoccurring problem if they're played well. And I used one to frustrate them something terrible. And then there was the petals. These are these fairy-like beings that are quite amusing if used appropriately. And they became, because one of the two dwarves had some sweets on him, they became enamored with him, and the dwarves managed to save the petals living community, the tree that they all lived in, from a mundane predator, and then later from a group of rival dwarves who were trying to sabotage things, and then it just built up from there. So, several unusual ways to start and getting the group together. There you go. I'm already over my 10-15 minute limit. As always, I'm always interested in viewing your guys' stuff. I try to do so every day. I guess I get a little, like to see more of it, but then I got more time than some of you guys do. Game on.